The morning my daughter-in-law handed me a list of house rules and said, "If you want to keep living here, you'll follow these." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I folded the paper in half, set it on the kitchen counter, and walked to my room. She did not know that I had spent 31 years as a forensic accountant. She did not know what I kept in the fireproof box at the back of my closet. And she did not know that the house she was standing in, the one with the wraparound porch and the magnolia tree in the front yard that my late husband planted the year our son was born, had never once left my name. She would learn. My name is Dorothy. I am 67 years old, and I have lived in this house in Georgia for 34 years. I raised my son here. I buried my husband here. I watched the magnolia tree grow taller than the roofline. After Gerald passed, my son Marcus asked if he and his wife could move in. Just for a little while, he said. His wife had lost her job. They needed to get back on their feet. I said yes without hesitation because that is what mothers do. That was 3 years ago. In those 3 years, I had watched my kitchen become someone else's kitchen. My dining room table rearranged to face a different wall because my daughter-in-law said the light bothered her in the morning. My Sunday routine interrupted, then erased. My name stopped appearing in conversations about the house. It became their house, their schedule, their rules. And I became the woman who lived in the back bedroom and was expected to be grateful for it. I did not say anything for too long. That is the truth I am not proud of. I smiled when I should have spoken. I stepped aside when I should have stood still. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Marcus would find his footing. I told myself love required patience. But the list changed things. My daughter-in-law had typed it. 12 points, single-spaced, printed on crisp white paper as if it were a lease addendum. No cooking after 9 in the evening. No guests without 48 hours notice. Laundry only on Tuesdays and Saturdays. Common areas to be kept to her standard of cleanliness. She had even included a line about the television in the living room, that it was for family use, meaning her and Marcus, and that I should use the small set in my bedroom if I wanted to watch something during their hours. Family use. I sat on the edge of my bed and read the list again. Then I read it a third time slowly. The way I used to read financial documents when I was looking for the sentence that told me everything I needed to know. And I found it right there at the bottom below the part about the thermostat setting. A line that said, "We appreciate your cooperation as we make this house work for everyone." As we make this house work. I opened my closet. I pulled out the fireproof box. I sat back on the bed and held the deed in my hands. Dorothy Ann Whitfield, sole owner. The paper was cool and certain. It did not know anything about house rules or thermostat settings. It only knew one thing. This was mine. I put the deed back. I closed the box. I walked to the kitchen, picked up the list, folded it again, and slipped it into my cardigan pocket. Then I walked to the back porch and stood in the evening air and let my mind go very quiet. Not the numb quiet of someone who has given up, the sharp quiet of someone deciding. I called my oldest friend Carolyn that night. We had met in our 20s, worked at the same accounting firm for 15 years, and stayed close through every season of life. She answered on the second ring and listened without interrupting while I told her about the list, about the 3 years, about the way my daughter-in-law had slid the paper across the counter as if she were doing me a favor. When I finished, Carolyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you still have Thomas Renfro's number?" I did. Thomas was a property attorney I had worked with on 2 estate cases before I retired. Precise man, methodical, the kind of person who never wasted a sentence. "Call him in the morning," Carolyn said, "and Dorothy, listen to me. Stop asking for your own house back. Stop asking for anything. You are not a guest. Act like the owner." I did not sleep much that night, but it was a useful sleeplessness. I lay in my bed in the back bedroom of my own home and made a list of my own, not typed, not printed, written by hand on a yellow legal pad, the kind I had used for 30 years at my desk. Numbers, dates, amounts, 3 years of utilities in my name, 3 years of groceries supplemented from my retirement account, a car note I had quietly covered twice when Marcus fell short without telling his life. Property taxes paid annually, always by me, insurance premiums, the lawn service I had kept running because Marcus said he would handle it and did not. By the time the sun came up, I had 6 pages. Thomas answered his office line at 8030. He remembered me immediately. I told him I needed to understand my options regarding occupants in a property I solely owned. Occupants who had no lease, no financial contribution, and who had now presented me with a document outlining my behavioral expectations inside my own home. Thomas was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, "You don't need options, Dorothy. You need a notice." He explained it the way he explained everything without drama. They were not tenants. A lease had never been signed. Occupancy by family invitation carried no legal standing in the state of Georgia beyond a formal notice period. He would prepare a 30-day notice of termination of occupancy, proper service, documented delivery, legal, clean, unassailable. "Will Marcus push back?" he asked. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I know his wife will." "They can push back all they want," Thomas said. "The paper doesn't care." I asked him when he could have it ready. I said Thursday was fine. For 3 days I moved through the house the same way I always had. I made my coffee in the morning. I sat on the back porch in the afternoon. I did not cook after 9. I did not rearrange any furniture. I kept the list in my pocket like a stone. I was about to skip across still water. My daughter-in-law watched me with the mild suspicion of someone who expects an argument and cannot understand why it has not come. Marcus seemed tired in a way he had been for months, the way a person looks when they are carrying something they have not named yet. I did not tell either of them what was coming. I had learned that lesson from my career. The most consequential documents arrived without announcement. That was what gave them weight. Thursday morning, I drove to a coffee shop 3 meals from the house. I ordered a plain coffee and a blueberry muffin and sat at a table by the window. At 9045, Thomas's associate, a young woman in a gray blazer carrying a leather satchel, pulled up to my house. I could not see it from where I sat, but I had given her precise instructions, and I trusted the process. My phone buzzed at 10,012. It was Marcus. I let it ring. It buzzed again. Then a text came through. "Mom, there's someone at the door. Call me." I sipped my coffee. At 10,021, my daughter-in-law called. I answered that one. Her voice came through sharp and quick, the tone she used when she wanted to sound in control but wasn't. "There is a woman here saying she has legal documents for the occupants of this address." "What is this about?" "Take the papers," I said. "Read them, Dorothy." Her voice dropped lower, a warning disguised as familiarity. "What did you do?" "I did what I should have done a long time ago," I said. "Read the papers. The language is very clear." She started to say something else. Something about conversations and respect and how this was not the way family handled things. I did not hang up, but I also did not respond. I listened to her words the way I used to listen to clients who came in with creative explanations for numbers that did not add up. Patient, unimpressed. "There's a 30-day notice in here," she said finally. Her voice had changed. The control was cracking at the edges. "Yes," I said, "that's correct." Silence. "Then you cannot be serious." "I am entirely serious." Marcus's voice came through in the background asking what it said. I heard my daughter-in-law explain it to him in a low, rapid voice. Then Marcus came on the line. Mom. His voice was different from hers, not sharp, unsteady. The voice of a man who has just looked down and noticed the floor is not where he thought it was. Mom, you can't do this to us. I set my coffee cup down carefully. Marcus, I love you. I will always love you, but I am not doing something to you. I am doing something for myself, and I should have done it a year ago. He went quiet for a moment. Where are we supposed to go? That, I said, is a question you two should have been asking yourselves for the last 3 years. I ended the call. I finished my muffin. I left a $5 tip. What happened next came in waves. The first wave was anger. My daughter-in-law called back twice. I did not answer. She sent a text that was 3 paragraphs long, cycling through indignation, victimhood, and threat, all within 100 words. I read it once and put my phone face down. Marcus sent a shorter message. Can we talk tonight? Just us, I replied. Yes. 7th porch. The second wave, the one I had not fully anticipated, came that afternoon. My daughter-in-law called my other son, Raymond, in Virginia. I found out because Raymond called me confused and a little alarmed, asking if everything was all right, asking if I had actually filed legal papers against his brother. I told him the truth, the same way I had told Thomas. No performance, just facts. Raymond was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I had not expected. Mom, she called me crying, saying, you ambushed them. She handed me a list, I said, of rules for how I was permitted to live in my own home. Another silence. Then softly, what I read him, 3 items from the list. The television hours. Raymond exhaled slowly. Mom, why didn't you call me when this started? Because I thought I could manage it quietly, I said. I was wrong. Do you need anything? I need 30 days of patience, I said. I have the rest. He told me he loved me and that I was handling it with more grace than he could. I thanked him and returned to my back porch and my book. That evening, Marcus came outside at 7 exactly. He had always been punctual, even as a child. He sat across from me in the wooden chair that had been on that porch since before he was born, the one with the slight wobble that everyone in the family knew how to compensate for. He folded his hands in his lap and looked at me with the expression of a man who had been practicing what to say. He started with the practical. They needed more time. The job market was difficult. His wife was in the middle of a certification program. 30 days was not enough. Could we negotiate 60? Could we make it conditional on certain improvements? I let him finish. I had learned that the most important thing you can do when someone is trying to negotiate with you from a position of desperation is let them hear themselves completely. When he stopped talking, I asked him one question. Marcus, how much money do the two of you have saved right now? He looked away toward the Magnolia Tree ballpark, I said. It's complicated, he said. How much? He told me a number. It was smaller than I expected, and I had already prepared myself for a small number. I kept my face still. And how much does your wife have in her accounts? I asked, separately. His jaw shifted. Something I recognized from 31 years of watching people react when someone asked the question they had hoped would not be asked. I don't really know her exact balance, he said. You don't know. She manages her own finances. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, Marcus, there is something I need to show you. I went inside and came back with 3 printed statements. Not all of what I had written on the legal pad that first sleepless night, but enough. The utilities for the past 3 years, the insurance, the 2 car note payments. I laid them on the small porch table between us and let him look. He picked up the papers slowly. His face changed in stages. The way a person's face changes when they are reading something they cannot argue with. Disbelief first, then calculation, then something heavier. She told me you offered to cover the utilities, he said very quietly. She said you insisted. I said nothing. The car payment, he started. She said she paid that back to you. She did not. I said he set the papers down. He pressed his hand flat against the table. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street, and the magnolia leaves shifted in the evening air, and my son sat in the wobbling chair where he had sat since he was small enough to need a pillow to reach the table, and he looked like a man hearing the sound of something falling from a very great height. I didn't know, he said finally. I know you didn't, I said. That's why I'm showing you. We sat there for a long time. The sky went from orange to gray to the particular shade of deep blue that Georgia evenings do so well. He did not defend her, which surprised me. He did not make excuses. He asked questions. Quiet ones, methodical ones. He was my son, after all. He knew how to look at numbers. Before he went inside, he paused at the door and said, Mom, I need some time to think. You have 30 days, I said. He nodded and went inside. I stayed on the porch for another hour. The following 2 weeks were not dramatic in the way my daughter-in-law might have preferred. There was no shouting match in the kitchen, no ultimatums delivered at dinner. What there was instead was a steady, grinding realization, the kind that cannot be undone once it has begun. Marcus started going through shared accounts. I know this because he came to me with questions, careful ones, on 3 separate evenings. Each time I answered what I knew and pointed him toward what he needed to find himself. A good accountant never does the work that the other person needs to do for themselves. They just tell you where to look. My daughter-in-law stopped speaking to me almost entirely. She moved through the house with tight-shouldered silence as if my presence were a weather system she was trying to wait out. She made 2 more attempts to recruit allies. She called my sister in Savannah, who called me afterward and said with great affection, Dorothy, you are the calmest person I have ever met and also the most terrifying. I took that as a compliment. On a Tuesday evening in the 3rd week, Marcus knocked on my bedroom door. He sat in the chair by the window, the one I used for reading, and he told me what he had found. I will not list everything here, but what I will say is this. The number in his wife's separate account was not small. It was not the account of a woman who had been struggling. It was the account of a woman who had been preparing. He did not cry. He was past that stage by the time he sat down with me. He was in the still, flat place that comes after you have already absorbed the worst of it. I feel like an idiot, he said. You are not an idiot, I said. You trusted someone you loved. That is not stupidity. That is faith in the wrong place. I backed her up against you, he said. Every time I chose not to see it. Yes, I said. You did. He looked up. He had expected me to soften it. I did not. I'm not going to pretend that was easy to watch, I said, but you are seeing it now. That counts for something. He moved out before the 30 days were up. Not because I asked him to, because he and his wife reached what I understand was a very brief and very direct conversation about the account, about the car payments, about the list of house rules, and about what the word partnership was supposed to mean. She left on a Saturday with 2 SUVs full of belongings and without a word to me. Marcus called Thomas's office the following Monday and asked a few questions about his own situation. Thomas gave him the name of a good family attorney. The house went quiet in a way it had not been for 3 years. The first night alone, I walked through every room slowly. I opened windows. I stood in the kitchen at 9:45 in the evening and made myself a cup of tea just because I could. I moved the dining room table back to where it had been for 20 years, angled toward the window that caught the morning light. It took me 6 minutes and felt like the most satisfying thing I had done in a long time. The magnolia was in full bloom that week. I had almost forgotten what it looked like from the front porch without other people's cars blocking the view. Marcus called often in those early weeks. He was staying in an apartment near his office, small, he said, and too quiet in a way he was not yet used to. We talked more during those weeks than we had in years. Not about his wife, not about the house, about his work, his plans, what he actually wanted his life to look like. He had spent so long managing her moods and her version of reality that he had stopped asking himself what he thought about anything. One evening he called and said, "Mom, I keep thinking, if you had just gone along with the list, how long would it have gone on until I couldn't anymore?" I said, "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." "Marcus," I said, "you are seeing it now. That is what matters." He was quiet for a moment. "She said you were being cruel. She said you ambushed us." "What do you think?" I asked. He paused. "I think you were patient for years and then you were precise." I smiled. That was my son. He had his father's way with the right word. There is something I want to say here because I think it matters, and because I have heard from too many women who have sat with their feelings for too long, waiting for permission. When I handed my daughter-in-law that list back on the counter that first evening, when I decided not to argue, I was not being passive. I was choosing the only language she would actually hear, the language of documentation, of ownership, of what is legally yours. Because here is what I know from 3 decades of following the numbers. Feelings are real, but feelings alone do not hold up in a room with paper. And when someone has decided that your patience means weakness, your kindness means obligation, and your silence means consent, you do not talk them out of it. You show them the deed. Carolyn came over the week after the house was empty. We sat on the back porch with sweet tea and the kind of silence that only old friends can share without filling it. After a while, she said, "How do you feel?" "Returned," I said. She nodded as if she understood exactly what I meant, because she did. The following Saturday, I started something I had thought about for a long time, but kept putting off for reasons I now understand were about smallness, about having been made to feel that my presence took up too much room. I invited 4 women from my neighborhood to the house for coffee. 2 were widows. One was recently retired. One was in her mid-60s and had been quietly supporting an adult child for years in a way that had made her more tired than she admitted. They came in and sat around my dining room table that was back in front of its window where it belonged. And we talked, not about bitterness, not about the past, about the specific and practical matter of ownership, about what is yours legally and morally, and what you have the right to protect. One woman said her son had been asking her to add him to her deed for his credit history. Another said her daughter had been managing her bank account for 2 years, and she did not fully understand why. Another said she kept meaning to update her will, but her son-in-law always seemed to be around when she sat down to think about it. I listened. Then I took out a yellow legal pad and we went through it together. Your name on the deed means the house is yours, not shared, not assumed, not transferred by time or habit. Yours. A will is how you choose what happens after while you are living. Nothing requires you to give your property to someone who is already living in it. A credit question is not a reason to sign anything. A management arrangement is not a reason to hand over control of your finances. And if someone you love becomes angry when you ask to understand something that belongs to you, that anger is information. Write things down. Keep copies somewhere they cannot reach. Know your attorney's number. And understand this. Being generous with your home, your money, and your time is a gift. It is not a contract. And gifts can end. They stayed for 3 hours. 2 of them made phone calls. The following week. One called a property attorney, one called her bank. Marcus came to dinner the following Sunday. He brought a plant for the porch, a small potted gardenia. He said he picked because it smelled like Georgia summers. He set it on the railing next to the wooden chair and sat down across from me the way he used to when he was young and had something he wanted to say but was working up to it. "I talked to a counselor," he said. "For the first time in my life, actually good," I said. "She asked me when I learned to disappear to keep the peace." He looked at the gardenia. That one sat between us for a moment. "You're right," I said. "I showed you that. I'm sorry." "I'm not blaming you," he said quickly. "I know, but it's still true. We sat with it. The way you sit with true things sometimes." He asked if he could come for dinner on Sundays, not to move back. He was clear about that. He needed his own space. Just dinner, just the table by the window and whatever I felt like cooking and the kind of conversation that does not have to be careful. I said yes. After he left that evening, I stood in the kitchen and thought about what it had cost to wait so long, the years of making myself smaller, the rooms I had quietly surrendered the voice I had not used, and then I thought about what it had cost to finally stop waiting. A list on a kitchen counter, a call to an old colleague, a document delivered by a woman in a gray blazer on a Thursday morning. Not cruelty. There is a thing that happens when you have been patient for so long that people stop noticing it. They begin to read your silence as consent. They read your accommodation as confirmation. They stop seeing the effort it takes and begin to see the result as default, as something they are owed. The moment you change that, they call it an attack. They call it unfair. They call it a betrayal of love. But here is what I know now. Sitting on my back porch in the early morning with a cup of coffee and a house that breathes at its own pace, love does not require you to become invisible inside your own life. Patience is not the same as permission. And saying no calmly, legally, finally, is not the end of a family. It is the beginning of an honest one. My magnolia is blooming again this week. The moment you change that, they call it an attack. They call it unfair. They call it a betrayal of love. But here is what I know now. Sitting on my back porch in the early morning with a cup of coffee and a house that breathes at its own pace. Love does not require you to become invisible inside your own life. Patience is not the same as permission. And saying no calmly, legally, is not the end of a family. It is the beginning of an honest one. My magnolia is blooming again this week. It does every spring. And every spring I am startled by how much of it I can see now from the front porch. The light comes through the branches in the early morning in a way I had stopped noticing. I notice everything now. If you are listening to this and there is something in your home, your name is on something that has quietly become someone else's territory while you held your tongue and told yourself it was temporary. I want you to hear me. You are not being unreasonable. You are not being unkind. You are not destroying your family by asking to be seen inside your own walls. You are allowed to take your space back. You are allowed to say, "This is mine," gently, legally, completely. And you are allowed to do it without explanation, without apology, and without waiting one more year for someone to be ready to hear it. I want to hear from you now. What did this story bring up for you? And tell me, where are you watching from?